when you're in a room and they're like, oh, here's the nurse. And some people are like, oh, no, I'm just a CNA. And they make a point. They're like, you're not just a CNA. You are the CNA.
Welcome to the Health Science Coach Podcast. My name is Drew Garner, and I'm a health science and physical education teacher. This is a podcast to help students, parents, and recent graduates learn about pathways into healthcare and sports medicine careers. These industry professionals lay out how their experiences have helped them get to where they are now. If you enjoy this content, please subscribe to the channel or download through your podcast player. Thanks again for spending some time with us today. Now let's dig in. Today we get the pleasure of meeting with Jordan Crowell. She is a certified nurse assistant with Overland Park Regional and Children's Mercy in Kansas City. She is also a 2018 Turner High School graduate. Welcome, Jordan, and thanks for meeting with me today.
Of course.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to talk to you in the last 5 years, I guess, since you've been out of high school. Can you give us a little detail about your career and what you do at both Overland Park Regional and Children's Mercy as a CNA?
Yeah. So most of the time it is a lot of vitals, and vitals consist of just, checking the patient's heart rate, respiratory rate, their blood pressure, and their oxygen. And once we get those blood pressures, we can kind of see like where the patient's at and what they're doing. And we can report to the nurse like, hey, I think this kid is, worse, or he's not so bad. So that way they can kind of get an idea of where their care is and like what direction it's going to head to. After that, it's just really assisting the nurses with any help that they need, holding kids for IV placement, or if we need to happen to, if a kiddo breaks their arm and we need to splint that arm, you have to hold the arm in a correct position, make sure everything's aligned up, things like that, just being an extra set of hands for the nurses.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So we kind of talked a little bit before, you've had both of these positions and just started at Children's, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So as a CNA for 5 years, what's a kind of like the day in the life or like a typical duties and daily experience like?
I will say it is completely different working with adults and working with children. I had worked with adults in the beginning, and I realized that is not my forte.
Okay.
But it's kind of like the basic outline from your day-to-day is all the same. You go in and you check on all your patients, make sure that they are set up, that they don't need anything, because shift change is the most important for the nurses. They've got to make sure everything is reported to the next nurse correctly and nothing gets mixed up or not passed along, because those little details can be pretty important. So when we come in on shift change, we make sure all the kids, make sure that there's no diapers change needed, no supplies needed for the parents, make sure that they have water or that they've eaten for the evening.
Real quick, when are those shift changes done? Like you said, you come in. What's a typical CNA time span for working?
Typically, we work 12 hours, especially if you're working in a hospital. There's sometimes that you can work 8 or 4. So that's just really to come in and help out when they need it desperately. Right. But we're scheduled 12 hours.
Okay. So there's a daytime shift and an overnight shift.
Yep. And I have learned over the years that nighttime is just my jam.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay. I worked for probably 3 years on day shift, and then COVID hit and they were like, well, we need someone on nights. So I tried nights and I've just never gone back.
Oh, that's awesome. That's, a lot of people that I've talked with, nurses wise, they either really struggle with nights or they really love it. So that's interesting to see that how you just kind of pick and chose, feeling that night evening schedule for you. So kind of back to
more too.
Right. That's actually definite benefit, that evening shift time, being able to make that little bit more money is probably pretty helpful.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you come in is it at 7, a little before 7, or when does your shift typically start?
So it differs between hospitals. At Overland Park Regional, we come in and we have huddle at like 6:45.
Yep.
we say, this is the patients we have, this is what's going on, and then we disperse and we switch. So about 7, everybody's switching.
Okay.
At Children's Mercy, we come in and we meet at 7 and we say, this is what's going on, this is what we have.
Right.
And then we switch.
Okay. So then once that switch is done, you've talked to your nurses, you've talked to the CNA that you're relieving, you find out who your patients are, and then you, like you were saying, you go around and check on your patients, making sure they have what they need. I'm guessing, the overnight, depending on the severity of the reason why they're in the hospital, it could be pretty easy, or it could be really difficult if that kid's not sleeping.
It really seems to be that there's no in between. Because at both places I do work in the emergency department.
Okay. Yeah, that would be pretty intense.
So there's really no in between, after you check on your patients and whatnot. And in triage, that's when you assess the patient of how, like, when you get their vitals and stuff, how, like, what direction that kid's going to be going in. It's going to be a good direction or a bad direction. And that's when you would notify the nurse, like, hey, I really think this kid's not doing so well.
Okay. So on typical night, how many patients are you typically overviewing and checking on throughout the evening?
So when we meet at the beginning of the night, they tell us a year ago today we had 173 patients. Today we've seen this many so far, and it's typically anywhere from 150 to 200 patients.
And then you specifically as the CNA over those patients, how many are you kind of looking at?
So we divide up in sections. So, and there's typically 2 CNAs per section. So I could say we would have as many as maybe 12 to 14 at a time, but they're all cycling in and out.
Right, between the two of you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So that's kind of an example of what you're doing on that day-to-day basis. How did you kind of get into wanting to become a CNA?
So I knew from the beginning, when I was actually in high school, as my sophomore year of high school, I was babysitting just to make a little extra cash because at that time I wasn't old enough to have an actual job. So I decided I was going to babysit, and I was babysitting my friend's son that had leukemia, and he just won his fight with leukemia, but he still needed just a little bit extra help, and he needed a breathing treatment and some medication before bed. And I told his parents, I was like, you know what, stay out late, it's okay, don't worry, I will take care of that. She showed me how to use the breathing machine and what medication to give him, and he was playing all night, having a good time, and he knows that his medication makes him sleepy, and he's like, just 10 more minutes, just 10 more minutes. And I'm like, okay, he's having a really good time. I'll give him 10 minutes. So, 30 minutes goes by, and I'm like, oh man, we have to really do this. So I'm like, you have to sit down, do your breathing treatment. He does his breathing treatment, and you can see, even though he was running and playing and having a good time, you could see a difference between before the breathing treatment, after. He looked like he wasn't struggling to breathe. He was actually like having an easier time to breathe. And after his medication, probably about 30 minutes, like right before he laid down, you could just see the relief. Because having leukemia, your whole body is in pain. And even after all, he was still so swollen, and you could tell he had to use a little walker to walk. And just seeing that relief from him, I was like, oh my goodness, I made him feel so much better. Even though I was the bad guy, I was like, hey, we have to do this. Right. Later on, I was like, he felt better in the end anyways. Yeah. And from then I knew that I wanted to be a nurse. And I was in high school, I was doing research, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get my CNA, then I'm going to get my LPN, and then my RN license. Well, little did I know, thankfully, from waiting, I didn't have to do all those steps. Yeah. But I am grateful that I got my CNA before my RN license, because you really get comfortable with dealing with patients, that hands-on experience. You aren't nervous when you go to the patients and like, hey, I'm your nurse, and you're kind of like nervous, and you're like, and they're like, does this lady really know what she's doing?
And you've been in there doing it for 5 years, so now you're getting that kind of that experience, like you said,
that confidence. Yeah.
the mental confidence of being able to communicate with them, understanding what the nurses' needs are, the doctor's needs are, how to consult and talk to those patients and make them feel better while they're in there being treated.
Right. And know what to say, like if they have a question, and just be like, oh, I know that's a question for the doctor, or let me go get your nurse. She will know more than I do,
That's good. So your senior year here at Turner, you were able to go to Kansas City, Kansas Community College and get that CNA license through while you were in school. We have typically 8 to 15 kids now currently that are doing that, and so it's pretty exciting to see kids, continue to go to that program, and then now especially talk to them after they've been out. Why did you kind of choose? I mean, other than Kansas City, Kansas Community College is right up the street from us, but what helped you choose to do that while you were a senior versus doing it after high school?
To be 100% honest, Turner High School paid for it, paid for all of it. They team up with KCKCC and they take care of it while you're in high school, and I didn't have to pay a thing. And I was like, well, you got to start somewhere. And at that point, I had thought that I had to become a CNA, become an LPN, and then an RN. So that was my first step. I was like, well, you got to start somewhere. And I really talked to I think it's like the financial advisor or the counselor, something at Turner High School. And they really led me in the right direction. And they're like, I really think that you should do this, if you want to become an RN. And I have siblings in that at the time were grades older than me and younger than me. So I kind of got an advantage of, so I knew some people in my older brother's grade, and they had previously been through the CNA program and things like that. So I just kind of started asking questions, really.
Now looking back at it, what advice do you have for a junior or a senior that is wanting to apply for that program and go into it, as far as the school and education goes? What advice do you think would have benefit them for that pathway?
I think that if you're going to go into healthcare, I really think that you should become a CNA. Even if you take that program that Turner offers and you don't like it, you get halfway through and you're like, I don't think this is a path for me. You can always get out. And even if you're like, you get your CNA, you go through it and it's not your forte, that doesn't mean anything. Now is the time to do it, because Turner and KCK are willing to help you. And rather than later on in life, having to pay that out of pocket or having to try and get financial help. And I think that's really what this program is meant for, is because if, when you're young, you don't really know what direction in life you want to. You kind of have an idea, but you don't really know exactly like, oh, I know, because you haven't experienced it.
Yeah. So educationally wise, what do you think that students should be focusing on while they're in that program, as far as time management or study skills, class grades, that kind of stuff?
I will say I don't think it was any harder than junior year in high school. And that was my hardest year, was junior year of high school. But just make sure that you're getting all of your things turned in. And if there's something that you're struggling on, just make sure you're strong in the other parts, like the book work or the class work. There's going to be big projects that you're working with people. But if you work your hardest, something that comes up that, you may struggle with, you're still going to get through that program and you're still going to pass, because they see that you're doing hard work and getting your things done.
And you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier when you were talking about your friend's son and working with him and seeing the relief of him once he got that medication, and you were the one that was providing it, and that kind of brought out your passion for the field. What do you just love about your job, or like find really rewarding?
I'm never the bad guy for the patients. Yeah, so we might be helping hold the kiddo down for an IV or, really making them upset, but I can always like, oh, here's a toy, or look, we have a sticker or a snack, just something to really, when they're younger or even just kids, like you show them like, "Hey, this is the bad, like I know we had to do this, but look, there's all these good things."
Right. Yeah, that's pretty cool. As far as being a CNA, what misconceptions do you think either you had prior to going into the program and becoming a CNA, or that patients or other health professionals might have?
Everyone thinks that a CNA is a professional butt wiper, but honestly, I truly don't think that I've ever wiped that much butt, because I'm just being honest, everyone, you can look it up, CNA, and online it was like, oh, this is your job role. And you're like, no, not really. You're truly helping the patients. But just because we can't give medication or we can't, you know, do things like a nurse role, just because we don't have that license doesn't mean that we can't help the patients. We're helping them on a more personal level.
So tell us a little bit more about your experience with working with different healthcare professionals at Children's. Some of the working with some of the nurses or doctors. What has that experience been like, and what have you kind of learned from them about the healthcare professions?
When I first started, I kind of seen that the nurses talk to the nurses and the doctors talk to the doctors and the CNAs talk to the CNAs. So I was like, I don't know if the education levels just click more or what, but now that I've been working there for a little while, like I have gotten close with all the doctors. We've gone out to eat several of times. Like, no matter your education level, we're all people. And, you don't have to be scared of the doctors to talk to them. Just things like that. It just,
Okay. So you're basically trying to say, I think, that as being a part of that healthcare team, they respect you guys, as well as the level of communication throughout working with the patient.
yeah. And a lot of people really make it a point, because CNAs are kind of on the lowest totem pole of education wise. But when you're in a room and they're like, oh, here's the nurse. And some people are like, oh no, I'm just a CNA. And they make a point. They're like, you're not just a CNA, you are the CNA.
I like that. So when you're working in the hospital, what's your ideal patient kind of look like? You said every day is different and all the patients are different, especially working in the ER. When you're working with those kids, what's that kind of level of involvement, I guess, as far as the patient wise?
So a kid could check in, and really it's just the parent's instinct. If it's a first time mom and they're really scared and the kid bumped their head and they have a little scratch, you know, that could be just as simple as that. And they come in and they get it cleaned out, and we put some Neosporin on there and a Band-Aid, and they're out the door. Or there's sometimes that there's the mom of 6 kids comes in and he's like, he fell and busted his head on the concrete 3 days ago and it's still not closing up. And you're like, oh my gosh, you need a lot of stitches.
Yeah.
But then there's also like, the emergent EMS calls that there's like, a kid accidentally got a hold of mom's medication and they walk in and they're holding baby and it's blue. And we have to basically yank the baby and run back and start doing compressions.
That's pretty intense. We had a trip to the ER ourselves in the fall, and it was definitely an experience as far as spending the day in there. Have you ever had any unpleasant experiences with patients?
Yes. We have a frequent flyer,
Okay.
and there's some mental health. There's some, I don't want to say on the spectrum, but there's some
sort of mental health
There's
issues.
some major minor details along with this kiddo, and I was just trying to de-escalate, and we put our hands where we were not supposed to, and then they grabbed my bun, and I had to wash my hair in the sink with Dawn dish soap. And then the nurse later on ended up on the floor because she got kicked.
Yeah.
So you really just gotta know your boundaries with the patient.
Especially when working with someone like that, I feel like, just like being a teacher, there are those certain students that need to know what triggers them a little bit and what to look out for as far as
and
that.
You can only try to de-escalate so much, because then they'll start escalating again.
Yeah, exactly. As far as professional development for CNAs, what does that look like as far as learning new skills or techniques or refreshing courses?
So I know at the hospital we have to renew our BLS, which is CPR certification. We have to renew that every 3 months, and there is a video course, and then you actually do it on a mannequin.
Yep.
And there is constant education, and if you don't keep up with that education, you could get fired. And it's as little as setting up a ambu bag, where you, like, if you were to have to bag a patient and give them breaths, or it could be as little as making a bed or how to get water. It's like, well, we know how to do that, but
just have to re-show those skills. And then, were you in my health class?
I believe so, yes. I know I had taken one of your classes.
Yeah. So in our health class, we teach that CPR skill.
Yes, yeah.
So I remember, having you in there and teaching that skill with you. So that's pretty exciting to be able to teach that in high school, and then you guys using that and getting certified every 3 months. That's pretty interesting. As far as the industry trends or any new techniques or equipment that's used, what's kind of out there for CNAs that's something new and exciting that's come along in the last year or two?
I mean, all the scrubs are fancy now. It used to be just the scrubs that were like straight boot cut pants. You had your 4 pockets. Now it's like you have a million pockets, and there's jogger typed. They're all kinds of fun colors. But I don't notice myself using a lot of equipment. Just because, like I said, we're really just that extra set of hands for the nurses. But the vitals machines, I remember when we had to take everything manually when I first started, manual blood pressure. You had to use your stethoscope to listen to that heart rate and respiratory rate. But other than that, now it's just a machine on wheels. You just plug everything in and it tells you right there on the screen.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits, I think, to have that as a constant, continuously monitored versus coming in and manually doing that all the time.
Yeah. I will say, make sure that you are confident in doing all of the vitals manually, because I'll tell you that monitor is not always correct. I've noticed that since starting at Children's, because they make us listen to the heart rate and respiratory rate with a stethoscope.
Yeah, that's good to know too. I mean, just to double check it and make sure it works. And, sometimes it may be low on batteries or not charged or whatever. And to be able to have that skill, I think is really important.
Just a matter of a patient movement. It could pick up that heart rate twice, and then they're in tachycardia, and you're running them back to the treatment room for no reason.
Especially with kids, because a lot of their body parts are a lot smaller, and some of those machines don't necessarily fit on kids' fingers as well as they do adults or bigger kids. So far, professionally in your career, what are you most proud of?
I would really say the comfortability that I am with the patients, and the confidence knowing what to do next. Like if a patient's declining, I know to get them to that treatment room, get them hooked up, and I'll just say, we're going to treatment room, whatever, and everyone just follows,
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that confidence, that patient could potentially not make it.
Right. Yeah, I feel like that's a big skill to, and like you said, being in it now 5 years and having that hands-on experience, gaining that confidence level of working with patients is a really big skill.
Yeah.
If you could go back and change something along your career or your education or path to where you are now, is there anything that you would change?
Well, I knew from the get-go that I wanted to work in pediatrics, but I didn't start out in pediatrics. I thought that I had to have experience. You
Right.
don't necessarily have to have experience. You just have to show that you're willing to try. And if I would have jumped in with kids, I probably would have my nursing license by now.
Okay. So thinking about that, where do you see yourself professionally, in 10 years, or what are your plans for your career? You kind of talked about wanting to become a nurse a little bit. Have you started any educational pathways for that, or where do you kind of see yourself down the road?
I see myself probably in the next fall semester, starting my prerequisites and then go ahead and head into that RN license. Eventually, I want to be a pediatric oncology nurse.
Okay, that's awesome. As far as schools for that, where have you looked at, and have you looked at any schools to go to yet?
Yeah, I was looking into KCKCC because they have a really good RN program. I've also looked into JCCC, um, just because I have a few coworkers that have been there and got their nursing license. But I am going to specifically get my associate's degree
Right.
and then go back for my bachelor's because the hospitals are willing to help with that schooling financially.
So as a part of that, as you get that education, how do those hospitals, how is that kind of set up? I know I talked with somebody previously that said, you sign a year contract and they'll pay for your X amount of education hours. Is that still how it's kind of set up?
Yeah, but I think they're leaning towards more years.
Yeah.
The least I've heard is 2 years. And I know that you have to initially pay for the schooling or take out student loans or whatever that may be, and then sign that contract once you have that license,
Okay.
and then they'll pay it back.
Okay. So you don't have to start paying on the student loans until you graduate. And then
Right.
once you graduate and sign that contract, they retro pay your student loans.
Yep.
Yeah, taking advantage of something like that is absolutely huge. If they had that in education, I think everybody would have,
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot
Yeah.
more higher degrees.
I feel like everyone would have more education if it was paid for.
Absolutely. Um, so then, how far can you take that as far as getting your degrees? You said um, for your nursing license to get that. Will that pay for any additional license later on, or how does that kind of set up?
I believe so. Once you stay that contract, whether that be 2, 3 years, I think you have to sign that contract because that's the amount of time it takes for them to pay it off.
Recoup that money.
Um,
Yeah,
but from what I hear is you can become a doctor and they'll pay for half of it.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really big time. So let's look at a couple different age groups and some advice you would have for them in their time frames of life. So we kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but looking at a high school junior or senior that's interested in getting into becoming a CNA, what do you think they should be focusing on, as a junior or senior in high school?
I would really just make sure that, if you currently are able to get through high school without, say you work a job and you're able to work a job and go to school, just being able to keep up with your schoolwork and doing that additional thing, because it's like having a job while you're going to school because if you want to become a CNA and someone else is paying for it, you're like, well, I have to pass. Or if that's something that you really want, that's a goal that you set for yourself. I have to do this. So really just making sure that you have your things prioritized. And
Okay. And then so while they're in that CNA program, once you're in the program, how long did it take for you to complete that?
I went from August to December.
Okay. So 5 months.
Right.
And then when you got done with that, were you able to get a job immediately afterwards, or?
Yep. So I think it's like your last day, you take your state test, and then you're able to print off that certification. Some people were having some trouble whether they passed the board or not. So I would say within a week,
Okay.
without a doubt.
Yeah. And then once you did that, what advice would you have for those students, once they pass that certification or that board exam, as far as looking for jobs and trying to find out where they would feel that they're a good fit?
So really just do your research, because there's all kinds of things. There's clinics, there's hospitals, there's emergency departments, there's urgent cares,
Nursing
there's
home.
like mental health facilities. They all need CNAs. So really, if you find yourself, oh, I think I want to be doing this, just go ahead and research it. Ask people questions. You can shadow there. I shadowed at a what's it called? A memory care facility, and that's where I started. But it really makes you feel like you're one of the patients after so long.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then what advice would you have for a new CNA that's been on the job, 3 to 6 months? What is something that they should be focusing on to improve their skills?
Practice makes perfect, really. You can be confident, but you can also be not so confident. So you always have room for improvement.
Cool. Do you have any books or videos, podcasts, something like that that you might recommend to a high school kid that's interested in becoming a CNA?
I don't currently. I haven't really gotten myself into podcasts, and when I read for fun. Not that CNA isn't fun.
Right. Okay. And then our athletic trainer came up with this question for us. If you dislike blank, then being a CNA is not the career path for you.
If you are not a people person,
Yeah.
CNA is not for you, because you're going to be interacting with a lot of people, whether that be nurses and doctors or patients. And I work with kids, so I have more people I interact with because I have the patients and the families and the brothers and the sisters.
Yep. Yep. And then let's kind of flip that, and I'm going to say you can't use people, but if you like blank, then being a CNA is the right career path for you.
Um, I would say that if you like to make people feel good, or you like to be the caregiver or whatever that position may be, I would definitely be a CNA.
Do you have any mantra or quotes that you kind of live your professional work life or your regular life through?
See, you're giving me all these trick questions. I really don't.
Okay, no problem. And if someone's interested in getting in contact with you to talk about CNAs, maybe they're a student, do you have any social media channels that they could reach out to you through, maybe through LinkedIn or something like that?
The best way is just go ahead and message me on Facebook Messenger, really.
Well, Jordan, thank you so much for spending this time with us and talking about becoming a CNA. Is there anything else you'd like to add or talk about?
No, really, if you're thinking about going for it, just go for it. You can always change your mind.
Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us. and teaching our students about being a CNA. And it sounds like you really enjoy your profession so far.
Yes, thank you so much.
If you've made it this far into the episode, I want to thank you again for watching. Please subscribe, share, and comment below with any questions or comments you may have. If you're interested in more information about other professions within healthcare careers, please visit healthsciencecoach.com and talk to your school counselor or academic advisor. As always, stay happy, healthy, and live life with passion.